Welcome to the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast on YouTube. My name is Carey Nieuwhof, and my goal is to help you lead like never before. So what I do every week is I sit down with world-class leaders and church leaders, business leaders, and I talk to them about what made them who they are and try to have the conversation with them that you would have if you got to sit down for lunch with them or have dinner with them or really got to spend some time with them. So we go into the backstory and we explore what made them who they are and some of the principles they've learned along the way. So if you enjoy this episode, I would love for you to like it, to subscribe, and also to share it with your friends. And in the meantime, here's today's episode. Jon Acuff, welcome back. So good to have you, man. It's been a minute. Well, no, actually, you interviewed me last time. That's what happened.
Yeah, that's true. I interviewed you and Tony. So that hasn't been long. I haven't been on your show in, I think, 2 or 3 years at this point.
It's been a while, but you weren't blacklisted, so that's good. So you can come back.
Fallout.
It wasn't like, when you say it that way, you make it seem like, yeah, I haven't been on your show in 2 or 3 years. Like, are you sitting around going, I wonder what I did? I wonder what I said.
You told me I had to be as strong as Craig Rochelle, and I was like, that's a weird condition, but I'll start doing curls. And that's what I've been working on. Eventually I came to a spot where I was like, I'm just going to wear black sweaters and nobody can tell what you look like. It's fine.
That's sort of my thing, right? Like dark colors, really, they just kind of hide the body.
They're the best. Like that's my jam. Black sweater, black t-shirt. Like it's my summer winter outfit. That's it. If I could wear and I went to an all boys Catholic high school and I hated that we had a uniform. And now as an adult, I'm like, they're amazing. Some people, that's their passion. Like they're matching pocket squares. Like it's not my jam, and that's fine.
Yeah, it's funny. You have ended up in that black t-shirt, black sweater thing, haven't you? Was that an intentional decision?
It was just, it's funny that we're talking today about a book about overthinking. I can overthink my wardrobe. Like it's paradox of choice. If I have 1,000 things to choose from, forget it. If I know like tomorrow, I got like 3 different sweaters and I'm going to pick a sweater and I'm going to wear like, especially when it's cold, it takes 14 seconds. And I have other stuff that I'm really excited about idea wise that I'd rather give all my creativity to. So it's more of a, like, I have a limited amount of creative space in my head and I want to give it to the stuff that's really getting me fired up.
Do you eat the same thing for breakfast every day?
Pretty much. I run the same loop. Like there's my friends who are like, let's go drive somewhere to jog some new trail. I'm like, nah, like.
That's weird. Okay. I do the same thing with cycling where my friends are like, why do you always do the same route? It's like, cause I don't have to think about it. And then I just get out.
I use running to turn my brain off. Some people use exercise to turn their brain on. And the difference, and I actually think this is a metaphor for the year we had last year. When you trail run, you have to think about every step. You can't tune out. Every step is thoughtful. True. Last year was trail running. A lot of us had some road running years where like we knew roughly what was going to happen. 2020 was trail running. 2021 is trail running. That's part of why people are so exhausted. And so, yeah, for me, I like road running because I know, okay, if I need to work out a problem or a thought or a book chapter, I know this route, I can go and I'm good.
You know, that's the same thing. It's interesting because I used to mountain bike. I've still got it hanging in my garage, but I'm like, do you know how much focus mountain biking takes? Like, the
mountain is trying to kill you. Like it is actively involved in your death. And you have to go, whoa. You almost got me. That drop off almost got that single track rock path almost got me. So yeah, I like to tune out on certain activities because I'm so tuned in on other ones.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a really good pro tip right there. So try eating the same thing for breakfast if that's your thing, or wearing similar or the same clothing. Really, to me, it's decision fatigue. It's one less decision I need to make that
I got
day.
Enough of them. I got a lot of decisions.
So speaking of the craziness of the last 12, 14 months, I want to start here. We're going to get to your new book. I think it's fascinating. I have read it. It is just, I so admire your craft and what you do with your craft. But your world, like everybody else, has got turned upside down. You went from speaking 50-ish times a year, mostly to companies, occasionally to church or conference audiences. And all of a sudden you're grounded. And you and I connect all the time. Like we talk all the time. So I kind of walked through that year with you. You walked through it with me. But I would love for you to just talk about publicly, like, what was that like for you? Because we all thought it was going to be a couple months, right? I remember we're like, okay, in August, we're back on the road, right?
Yeah. You and I talked in March, kind of in the middle, like when it was first starting. And like, we were kind of in the active, like events are starting to cancel. And we're like, yeah, but we got some coming up. I mean, I sent a friend a text on March 15th that said, I think the first half of the year is going to be challenging. Like, cause I really thought by July, this will be a wrap. Like we'll be all, and then it just kept changing. So I went through phases like everybody else did, where it was March and April were pretty disappointing. I felt pretty stuck. I felt like I was spinning. I didn't know what to do. I had, it's funny when I'm stressed out, I stop doing the things that relieve stress. Like that's one of the natural things that happens. Like, the 5 things and you go, I feel really stressed. I should stop doing those things. You go, how is that? Or like, I always tell people like isolation is a snake that eats its own tail, because people go, I feel really lonely. I should sit at home alone and figure out why, versus going out to get community. Like isolation feeds on itself. And so I had some months of that, but then it was like, I kind of came to a place, the way I said it was like, I can pine or I can plan. Like I can pine the old way. Oh, I used to have all these, like, this is what life used to be shaped as, or I can plan the new way. So I can go, hey, Carey, I'm thinking about doing a podcast. Like, can you give me a couple tips? Hey, Chris Zimmerman, I'm going to do a YouTube channel. Hey, I'm going to do, Speakers Bureau. Can I do virtual events from your studio? Like, so I started to kind of rebuild some stuff. And then it got exciting because I wrote a book about overthinking, and then the entire world collectively overthought. And so like prior to this year, it was an epidemic. Now I don't know what's beyond epidemic, but like we all overthought this year. And so I was really like, wow, this is an interesting time to start to release a book about this topic because of what we're in the middle of. Like, I think it's at an all-time high, overthinking. We're all stuck at home. We're guzzling like negative news. Like, I think it's a really good time to go, wait a second. You don't have to do that. It doesn't have to be this way. What if we learn to control our thoughts? And so I started to kind of shift towards that.
You took, was it a month or 6 weeks off last summer? Remember you headed off with the family. Do you want to talk about, was that pre-planned? Like,
no, not at all, dude. Like everything got canceled. So my oldest daughter was supposed to march in the parade at Disney with her high school band. So like that was one that bummed me out. Like my trips that get canceled, I'm a grown adult. Like I go, yeah, it's a bummer. I would like to do that. We had an anniversary trip to Italy that we were like, we'll move it.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah, you and Jenny. And was it a big one? Was it 20 for you guys or
20 this year? And we were going last year because that's when it fell. And we were like, we'll move it to March 2021, which that's not happening. So but as an adult, you can handle that. I felt more, sad for my kids and the stuff they got canceled. So we have Jenny's parents live in Blowing Rock, North Carolina, in the mountains, and they have a cottage. They have 2 places, and they have this little cottage. And Jenny was like, "Well, let's go up there for spring break." And Jenny said, Jenny is super, super smart and was like, "Hey, I think this is going to last 18 months." And I was like, "You mean 18 minutes?" And she was like, "No, I think you should pack more than you think." And me and my 2 kids were like, "We don't need to pack much." Jenny was the only one who packed enough clothes. We get to the mountains to stay a week, and we end up staying 5.5. And then we end up going to, going back to the mountains for 2.5. So I think all told, we spent like 10 weeks, in this mountain house, kind of working on, okay, what are we going to do? And fortunately for me, somebody told me the phrase Zoom class, like where you're part of the class that can actually work from home. And knowing that, you shouldn't condescend to people who can't. And so it gave us a sense of, okay, we can figure out how to do some of this from home. I mean, I can't do, like, live events are different, obviously, but fortunately I had some space where I could do some stuff from home and kind of reinvent my career to some degree. And so that's what we worked on.
So let's talk about reinventing your career, because you launched a bunch of new stuff in the last, you didn't have any immediate pressure, but obviously you don't want to sit there wondering, I wonder when I can get back on a plane again, right? Which is still wobbly. I don't know by the time this airs, but it's still wobbly when we're recording it. So let's talk about YouTube. Were you on YouTube prior to last summer?
I had a page. Okay. So here's the thing I tell people. Ask yourself what would have made this season easier, and then go build that thing. So it's a really powerful question, because and you don't feel shame that you don't have the thing already. That's useless.
Right.
Say, okay, what would have made this season easier? So in March or April of 2020, I was like, what would have made this season easier? If I had a really robust YouTube channel where I could communicate with clients, where I had another revenue stream, like that would make this easier. So guess what? A year from now, I'm going to have that. And I think that's a huge question that we can ask. So it's the same of podcasts. It's the same of writing a book. It's the same of a side hustle. You go, okay, right now I'm in this stressful situation. What's the thing I could build that would make this easier? And then you go build that. So that's what I did with YouTube. I had a YouTube channel, like I had put my flag in the ground, so to speak, but I had, like 1,100 subscribers, and hadn't made a video in like 4 or 5 years. And so I was like, you know what? I think it might be time to admit people online like these moving pictures. Like I think one of the, and I'm going to write about this at some point, one of the hardest things about learning something new is the perceived shame that you don't already know it. And so like you're afraid to ask the questions, the stupid questions. So I think it's really valuable to get into a community where you can say, I don't know this thing that it seems like everybody else knows. Can you help me? Like when you bump into somebody where, like, if you're a podcast person, you're going to start a podcast and you get some sarcastic person, you go, hey, I don't understand what Apple reviews are. I don't and they shame you, forget it. You're going to shut down the learning. You need people around you that when you go, I don't even know how to upload my thumbnail, they're like, oh, no problem. I didn't know either when I started. Let me show you. And so I think you have to find people like that, and you have to be willing to kind of go do the new stuff, and be an amateur, as it were.
Jon, I'm so glad you raised that about YouTube, because you got me thinking, like a couple of years ago when you're starting over again solo. I remember we talked about email lists, and you're like, I never took my email list very seriously. And I said I didn't want it. And then you kind of had to start from scratch again. Speak into that space, because there's a lot of people, we're going to talk about podcasting and your new book and everything, but there's a lot of people who are like, you know what? The podcasting ship sailed a long time ago. I kind of missed that boat. I'm not on YouTube now either. So if I was you, Jon, I would have gone last summer, but I didn't go last summer, so I can't go now. And I never built an email list, and I know I have to do it. Because you do that. You're just like, okay, I'm not in this space when I should be, but now I'm going to go in this space. So talk about that process.
Yeah, well, I mean, I admit it's frustrating. Like, it's frustrating to me that I had a blog in 2001, and then I took 7 years off. Like, what could I have done in that 7 years? But there's no good that comes out of kind of trying to relive or change those 7 years. Like, I get stuck. And you know, it's kind of like saying, I would love to go to Mars, but like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos are already kind of interested in Mars. So like Mars is already full. Like there's not too many podcasts. There's not too many books. So I just have to, like, the humbling thing for me is if you've got some, like, if you've established one part of your life, you then have to go being an amateur in another, and you forgot what that's like. Like I keep telling people, one of my mottos is be a tourist, because you need a new mindset to do something new. And a tourist, they go to a city and they ask lots of questions. They're not embarrassed. When I meet a tourist in downtown Nashville, they don't go, I feel terrible, but I don't know where the hotel is. They go, hey, do you know where that bar is? And I go, yeah, it's right over there. They ask lots of questions. They don't pretend to be experts. You don't get to learn if you're busy pretending. And so like, I have to constantly remind myself of that, because I'd rather look like an expert. I like knowing what to do. I love being on stage and knowing, here's the mark I'm going to hit. Here's the joke I'm going to tell. Here's this thing I'm going to flip. That's fun to me, but I get really stagnant. And I've got this idea that I'm playing around with where, like, if you gain, a pound is what, 12 ounces? Isn't that a pound?
Mm-hmm. 16, 12. Tony knows all that stuff, and she's not here right now.
So I think that's right. So if a pound is 16 ounces and you gain, is it 16 ounces?
I think it's 16.
Are you on the metric system?
Yeah, we are, but we do so Canadian, and I have a bone to pick with you at the end of the show. Okay,
yeah,
Canadian. All right, you know where it's coming.
Yeah,
but yeah,
let's say you gain half a pound a month.
Got it.
Barely notice it. You barely notice it. So you do that for a year, you gain 6 pounds, but you do that for 10 years, you gain 60 pounds, and that's where you wake up and go, oh my gosh. The same exact thing happens in every other facet of life. So you take 6 ounces or half a pound off of technology. You go, you know what? I'm not going to do that thing. I'm not going to do that thing. I'm not going to do that thing. You wake up 10 years in and you have 60 pounds of technological irrelevance. So you don't know how to use all the platforms. You don't know how to do all this stuff. And it's hard to jump back into it. In the same way that if you're 100 pounds, 200 pounds overweight, it's harder to run. Like there's a bigger challenge. And so for me, I have to remind myself, it's okay that it's a challenge. It's okay that I don't know YouTube. I can't compare myself to the person that has 10 million people. Like they're probably not amazing at writing books. And then the other thing you do is you realize you have certain strengths and you try to make the medium obey those strengths, or you try to kind of figure out, okay, where, which things work for me. I'm not a great visual storyteller. I'm just not. It's not my gift. It's not my craft. It's not what I do. Carlos Whitaker, amazing visual storyteller.
Yeah,
he
truth.
thinks in moving pictures. I don't think that way. I write books. I'm really good at writing books. And that's what I feel comfortable with. That's what I love to do. Can I figure out how to make YouTube kind of fit my strengths? I think I can. Will I quit YouTube if I think that I have to be as good a storyteller as Carlos or as good a community guy as Mr. Beast or whatever it is? I will. So you have to kind of figure out, where's my spot in this? Where's the things I can grow? But where's the things that I just need to admit that I'm never going to be the guy that's like, I want a drone, I want 4 cameras. Like that amount of technology overwhelms and cripples my creativity. It unleashes other people. For me, it's a crippler. I don't need to do it.
Well, there's 2 things there I just want to pull out. Number one, as a guy in your 40s, you're always reinventing, right? So you have older leaders or people who are not 22 going, yeah, okay, good. If Jon can reinvent, I can reinvent. That's a good thing. Second thing.
It's very gray.
But the other thing is, if you are a young leader, it's like things are going to keep changing on you. Right now, you have the digital native technology advantage because you grew up with it. It's ubiquitous. You know how to use it. But that's going to change because the kids are going to come along and they're going to learn some new stuff. What I got to ask you, because way more listeners are online now than were 12 months ago at this point. What have you learned on YouTube? Like, what is the value of YouTube for you, and what is it accomplishing for the people that you want to serve or reach?
Well, it's a completely different audience. So like, you can see that where it's humbling for me because I have 300,000 Twitter followers. I'll tweet a link to a video and it'll get 40 views. Like, I don't care who you are. That is a punch in the stomach. Like, that's just, I mean, if you were a baseball player and you hit the ball 40 times for every 300,000 at bats, like they wouldn't bring you back. So, but it's a different audience. It's a completely different planet. They want completely different things. So I like it that it lets me flex my creative muscle. I like it that it forces me to learn a new medium. I like it that it gives me a chance to practice an idea, like to get an idea out there and to shape it and to change it. And I just, there's so many people that are like, oh, I've kind of been waiting over at YouTube for you to dip your toe in. I couldn't convince them to go to Twitter. I couldn't convince them to go to Instagram. That's their spot. So like one of my big words for the year is serve. So if I'm going to serve people, I have to say, it's not like it's this obscure platform either. It's not like you're right. It's not like right now you're like, Jon, you're really big on like Bulgarian hologram technology. I'm like, I am. There's a guy that has a castle in Bulgaria and we have a server and I'm ahead of it. Like, dude, it's YouTube. It's almost like you're telling me like, Jon, you're really big on the telephone. I'm like, I am, Carey. Like you call up the operator, you get right through to somebody. So like, hopefully every leader who's listening to this and feels like it's too late, dude, I'm talking about my new YouTube channel and it is 2021. Like, jump in. It's not too late. If it's not too late for me, it's not too late for you.
That's good news. What got you the most traction out of the gate? Was it your email list? Was it Instagram? Or how did you, because you've got a decent following now on YouTube. So what were your momentum sparks on that one?
I mean, email list, definitely. When I would email out, hey, here's now what I had to be careful about was not just doing emails for every video, because that's not what people signed up to my email list for. That's the other thing is that when you start something new, you have to figure out, do I bring a new channel to do it? Do I introduce it slowly? Like the reason I retired Stuff Christians Like was I wasn't going to jam leadership ideas onto that site because that wasn't the relationship I had established with people. And so you have to be careful there. And then for me, recognizing moments and then creating content around the moment. So like one of my bigger videos, which again is not massive, but for me it was about Zoom. Like, hey, here's Zoom habits that are terrible. And it was of a moment in a moment. And I felt like that one did well because everybody was Zooming. And then another one was like just being honest. So I said, here's how much I made on my first book. Like here's.
Wasn't it? Yeah. And you had your 77-cent YouTube revenue check. I remember that one.
Yeah. Well, I had
that was fun.
Like, how much I made on YouTube. So like, I like to share. I realized that like, I can get really isolated from the people I'm trying to serve when I try to think of what it should be to be an author or a leader or an influencer. And I start playing a role, and that's a constant, never ending temptation for me. So I have to find ways to continually break the fourth wall and go, yeah, here's this thing that was really hard. Like, here's this thing I messed up. Here's this. And I enjoy that once I do it, but like, if I don't do it, my persona kind of calcifies and I end up playing a role and it's fake. And my wife is like, ugh, that content was fake. And like, it doesn't go well.
So podcasting is also new for you. You got a brand new podcast that just came out, and it was your second iteration into podcasting too, right? So do you want to unpack that a little bit?
Like 2.5 years off between episodes, just to kind of really, think it out. I had a big episode coming. Yeah, dude, I did. Yeah, I mean, so let's break the fourth wall. My first 8 episodes were super lazy because I went in with ego and was like, I'm Jon Acuff. I don't have to put work into this. I got an email list. I got Instagram. Like, I'm Jon Acuff. So I didn't work at it. Like, I just phoned it in and hoped that my audience, my influence, whatever would carry the day. And that's garbage. And so like this one, I was like, I got to put hours to it. I got to write questions. I got to write scripts. I got to hire people. I got to work with sponsors. Like, I'm going to do all the work that goes behind the thing to make the thing good versus just thinking, my ego I can just kind of coast. And so that to me on the back end is the main difference. And then on the front end, the main difference is I said, it's going to be about goals. Like, I'm a goal nerd. It's what I care about. It's what I talk about. It's what I do in my own life. So the podcast is all it takes is a goal, because I really believe in the power of goals. And that's what I want to help people with versus going, it's everything. It's some of this, it's some of that. And no, like a lot of times when you won't do the work of figuring out what you're doing, it's like your Walmart. If the shelves changed every day, like people would hate Walmart if every time they came in, the shelves are different. Or every time you went to Target, they're like, we just completely mix it up. You'd be like, but I don't know what I'm getting. You haven't set an expectation. Now for me, I would say to all your leaders listening, that doesn't mean you have to be hyper niche. There's this whole mentality of like, you got to find that you collect New Zealand stamps, like from the 1940s, and then do your podcast on that only. You only got to serve the New Zealand stamp population of 1940. And like, you got to do that. I'm like, that's not how I'm wired. I like a lot of different things. So my approach is find a big umbrella, goals, and write under that, like, and talk to that and be consistent to that. You have to constantly say, how does this honor the topic? How does this honor the topic? Like, you have to keep pulling it back to that. But at the same time, you can't limit yourself creatively on the front end and go, I got to find like my razor thin niche and just hope that I have enough passion to sustain it over a year, over 2 years, over 3 years. Like,
I want to ask you one more question about podcasting. I just want to say publicly, and you've heard this, and I've told so many people this privately, you gave me the best single piece of advice I think I've ever had on podcasting in 6 years of podcasting, which was, when the show started to take off, I think you and I were backstage somewhere, and I'm like, Jon, I'm getting pitched. Like, publishers are sending me books. People now want to be on. At the beginning, you're begging, your cat to be on, all that stuff.
You're like, Tony, episode 4 of you coming on. Let's do another one.
Yeah, you can do another one. You're right. And I remember you saying to me, it's like, it's your show. Do what you want. Like, what interests you? And I have used that as a filter. And so it's this really strange, eclectic mix of guests. But I'm interested in every episode. And
came from, I got to give credit, Brian Koppelman from the
Brian
podcast. He said, I asked him about how he picks his guests, and he's like, one time I made a mistake. I let somebody pressure me into having a guest on, a publisher or whatever that I didn't really care about. So he said, now I only interview people that I'm, deeply, honestly interested in. And I think that comes through in the interviews. And so, I was passing on that info. But
thank you, Brian Koppelman and Jon Acuff.
I've already turned people down. Like, I've only have a couple episodes, but I've been asked a couple times, and I don't like doing it. I hate telling people no, but like, I don't want to be like, this is my friend. They've got a new book about cats. Here's their cat book. And like, I don't know how that relates to goals, but cats, ugh. And you can tell when somebody's doing that. It's not as fun.
And it is hard because you disappoint people. You disappoint a lot of people in the process, and that never gets easy.
You're only going to I think about that a lot. You're only going to disappoint more people the more successful you are. So like, if your goal is to disappoint less people, don't ever create anything. Don't ever build anything. Don't ever grow anything. Don't ever get a platform. Like, it's part of the price of admission. Like, the more successful you get at sharing an idea, the more chances you have to disappoint people. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, that's just like, more people know about you. If only 10 people know about you, only one's going to ask you to do something. If 100 people know about you, statistically 10 are going to ask you. And you have to figure out, okay, how do I say no to this? How do I be kind, but at the same time at boundaries?
So speaking of Koppelman, his friendship and interviews with Seth Godin are some of my favorite. I mean, those two go deep. And so your podcast is brand new. I haven't listened ahead because you've released one episode in the preview, but it feels like you've gone almost like a Seth Godin format, right? Where it seems a little bit scripted, well produced, scripted not in a stilted way, but just like Seth is like calorie dense. Like I love Akimbo. He is so good at what he does. And he's been on the show as well. So we'll link to that episode. But tell me about the format you chose and why you picked it. Why that format? Because now you got social, you got your blog, you got your email list, you got YouTube, and everyone's into content these days. So I'm just picking this apart.
Yeah. So, I mean, I looked at what I feel good at. I'm not a great interviewer, and I think I'll get better. Like I think the format's going to be 3 or 4 episodes where it's a 15 to 20 minute of me kind of riffing. And then like an interview that I feel like is interesting. So I interviewed this woman, Colleen Berry, for an episode that's coming up in a couple of weeks. And she's in my new book Soundtracks because she's in the first chapter. She was a receptionist at a real estate company. She lost her job. She could have really easily gotten stuck in resentment. And instead she changed her mindset. And now she's the CEO. So I wanted to talk to her because I had interviewed her for the book. And I was like, oh, if I ever have a podcast. So that interview was amazing because we kind of got to go back and forth on what are you doing? Like one of my favorite things she said the best productivity app that's ever been designed is the timer on your phone. And I 100% agree. Like to set the timer, do the thing for half an hour, clear everything else. Like I loved how she said that. And so that's the format. So I think where I'll end up, because you know how it is, that's the challenge is you have to do you do your best, but you're not going to love the first episodes as much as a year from now or 2 years from now. That's just part of growth. Like it's like your first sermon isn't great. It shouldn't be. Like you don't want to peak. Like you hopefully will get better. But I think the first couple episodes, I wrote out a script. I follow it. Really thought through the idea. And now what I'm realizing is the best way to do it is I recorded one today. I write out an idea, but I leave space for new stuff to happen, which is the same way I do a speech. My favorite parts of a speech are I know it 90%, and that 10% that happens in the moment is magic for me and the audience. And so I want to have my podcast be like that, where I know, okay, I'm going to teach you this thing. Like I'm going to teach you how to grade the year on a curve because that's important. Okay, so how do we do that? And then I'm going to leave space for new ideas to bubble up because that's how I like to think. I like to think quick and go, oh, this idea that Carey said is related to this other idea. And here's something I heard Reggie said. And here's something my wife said. I put that in the book. My favorite definition of creativity is Dorothy Parker, who said creativity is a wild mind and a disciplined eye. And I love that because if I'll feed myself the wildness, I can have the discipline of my eye to connect things that aren't connected. And if I won't over script the podcast, new stuff can happen in the moment. I think listeners can tell and go, oh yeah, like he forgot he knew that story and he just added it in and it fit. Like that's really fun. Okay. I want to listen to more of that. That's how I'm thinking about it.
One of the things I really admire about you, and you and I've talked about that, is just how hard you work at your craft. Because we've spent so much time together, I see you practicing. I see you, rehearsing a line. Sometimes I'll see 10 iterations of a talk or a riff or a bit. And yet you're always reinventing yourself. And I think for a lot of leaders, most of the leaders listening to this show are creating content of some kind. Some in the church world, some in the business world, some in the online marketing world, et cetera, et cetera. Can you talk about that? Like, because when I hear you describing your podcast, I'm like, oh, you follow Koppelman's advice. It's like you're doing something you're actually interested in. You're like, oh yeah, she's not a well-known artist. Nobody would know her name, but she's going to be one of my first guests because she just has a fascinating story and I'm interested in it. And she was in my book and it kind of shows up. And so you're always reinventing, and yet the stuff that you own, you're always polishing. Is there a tension in that? I don't know what the question is, Jon, but do you see like it's a fun combo, dude?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think I heard somebody say once, it's funny, like this is the wild mind. We went to Vietnam. The readers of my blog had raised money to build 2 kindergartens in Vietnam, which was crazy. And we went there. And this guy that was on the trip with us was like, Vietnam is kind of like an accordion. in that like the communism expands and then it constricts, and the country has this. And so I love, like, not from a political standpoint, I love that idea of an accordion. And so for me, it's like I expand an idea and then I constrict it. Like I'm trying to concentrate it. So I just did like the finish course. The first time I did a finish course, there was 30 ideas, 30 lessons, and it was too much. And so I concentrated it down to 6. And so I like to take the idea and then I'm workshopping it, going like, this is better, this is funny, this is interesting. But a lot of that starts with what I call foyer ideas, where an idea that I'm so excited that if you came to my house, I wouldn't let you get past the front door before I told you. And my wife's like, whoa, let them take their coat off. I'm like, no, you got to hear this thing. So like, and then I'll collect them and I'll riff on them and I'll touch them multiple times. So like a foyer idea for me right now, an engineer that I meet with every other week, named William, good friend of mine, was telling me that one of the engineers that reports to him was at Georgia Tech and they had a contest. And the professor said, you have to sort these marbles as fast as you can, different sizes, different colors, whatever, using gravity as the power. So a top bottom kind of thing with these pieces. So like everybody built these complicated chutes and there was all this scoring system. And this one dude walked in with a tube and like a plate that went inside the tube. So a horizontal kind of plate. And when the professor started the timer, he dumped all his marbles in the top, removed the plate. They all fell down in 0.01 second. And he won the contest because he realized the greatest score maximizer was speed. The rest of the stuff didn't matter. And everybody was kind of frustrated, but like, I'll remember that idea and I'll capture it and go, if I ever need an illustration of, do you know the rubric? Like, have you even checked what you're scored on? Because I guarantee there's leaders right now that are doing 10 things and there's 2 that actually serve people. And there's 2 that people actually care about. And they feel stressed. And if they retired the 8 and said, oh man, like people care more about how I interact with them in the lobby than that I have a perfect phrase in my speech. So why don't I put some more time into my lobby versus I got to find some amazing illustration and look like a certain type of person on stage. And so I'll collect that and then I'll figure out a spot for it and then I'll shape it. And then if I start to get feedback or if somebody goes, another example, I was telling a story about, I read an article in the New York Times that asked, why didn't Kodak create Instagram? Nick Bilton wrote this article. And they asked, why didn't Polaroid? And the whole point of the article was because in their culture, a corporate culture like that, no one could walk in and go, hey, I got this crazy idea, because they already had success. And so then I go, I'm going to add to that. There's a great danger when you move from innovation mode to protection mode. Oh, that's like innovation to protection. That's the thing that happens. You start to protect the thing that's already been built. I tell that story on stage. A woman comes up to me and goes, hey, I did my thesis in college on how Kodak failed that way. Do you know what they invested in during the digital revolution? I'm like, I don't. She said, paper quality. So at a time where people were saying, we're going to spend less money, we're going to do less photos printed out, they're like, what if the paper was really expensive though? And so I'm kind of like, those are magnet ideas that I'm gathering other pieces on and I'm kind of using them and changing them. And yeah, that to me is where the craft part is.
You see, okay, you know what I think is underneath this, which I think is so fascinating. A lot of us were, and the disruption last year really threw this into the spotlight. We all had our rhythms, right? So you're a public speaker, you get paid good money. And like when you go to Microsoft or you go to Boeing or wherever you happen to be speaking at Dell, you better deliver, dude. You're not experimenting on stage. Okay. Maybe you get 5% experiment. Maybe you get 5% experiment, maybe 2% experiment, but you're not experimenting on stage. Your whole model, I'm glad we chased this down. This is probably worth the price of admission. So your whole model gets blown up. You can't do it. But I think what's fascinating for a lot of us who produce content is we are so used to doing all the prep in the background. Work, polish, present publicly. So you're doing the talk, you're doing the vision night, you're doing the fundraising pitch, you're doing the sermon, you're doing the book or whatever. And I think what's true about the internet is, no, you're experimenting in real time. So first iteration of the podcast failed. All right. Notice that, or you didn't like it. So now we're coming back. Didn't like the way I did the finished course the first time. Not all is lost. It's not like courses are bad and the finished course is bad. It's like, no, I'll make it better. And I wonder if that's the new paradigm where we're all experimenting. You know, the staff, the joke I have with my staff is the internet doesn't lie. And I keep working on stuff that I think is brilliant. And the internet is like, nope. And then sometimes I riff something off and the internet's like, yay, upvote. and you learn from that, and then you move on, you do your next product. There's something to that, isn't there? Like in the moment we're in.
That reminds me of Tim Ferriss interviewing Seinfeld. I don't know if you heard that recently.
That's a great interview.
It's amazing. But remember, Tim Ferriss says to him, once you get off stage, do you get feedback from other comedians? And he says, why? He said, I already got the feedback I needed, the audience. That's the only feedback that matters. Like, he doesn't workshop. So like, it's the same thing where that's why I will workshop things where I'll do an Instagram live. And it'll be 3 minutes and I'll be like, hey, here's an idea. And then that idea, I'll go like new stuff will happen. I'll go shape that into a YouTube video. And then if that goes really well, guess what? I'm going to bring that into a speech. And if that goes really well, guess what? I'm going to bring that into a book. So that's where it's an idea funnel where nobody, like if you're on Instagram live and you're like, oh, I didn't like that, it wasn't worth the money, like full refund. It cost you $0. Like I'm not, but like if I see people go, oh, that phrase or that idea, or if I feel it was the right phrase, then I'll change it and then I'll add it to YouTube and then I'll actually write it and then it'll become a podcast. Like I recorded a podcast episode today that started as an email and a YouTube video. And I was like, oh man, there's something here that I'm curious about. So yeah, I think that's one of the lies you have to get over is that if you like the minute an idea is out, it's old. That's not true. Like the minute an idea is out, it's beginning. Like, and it's entered the phase of iteration and change and growth and evolution. And that's a hard one for me because I'm a new idea guy. I love new ideas. It's not easy for me to go kind of shape and hone, but when I do, they're so much better. They are so much better. Like I know, like I'm looking at the kind of the windows that I stare out every day. And I've got an idea right here. Let's see, I'll pull it off. It says, it's from 827. It says, ask for more. So I know that I'm going to sit with that because I realize when I'm negotiating, when I'm doing things like ask for more, like there's always more. Like I've never had somebody respond to me, you're so greedy. I can't believe you asked for but that's the fear. So I have to be reminded to do that. So probably what I'm going to do, I got this idea where I have one of those signs where you can put like a letterboard sign on. I'm going to stand out in my backyard, holding that up, John Cusack Say Anything style, and have my wife take a photo, and that'll be an Instagram post. Because then I'll get to write, what are the things you wish you could remind yourself about yourself? And like, that's a cool concept. And I haven't done it yet, but it's in the funnel and I know it's coming and I'm going to do it at some point. And so like, I'm like one of my favorite things, Al Andrews, you should 100% have on your podcast.
Okay. Noted.
Al Andrews said to me, and his background, he's a counselor. He was in Nashville forever and realized most of his therapists or most of his patients were musicians and they couldn't afford it. So he went to every major label in town and said, you're spending millions of dollars to blow up these people and then their lives fall apart. Let me be a safe place for them to protect their heart. And so now and they all sponsor him, Sony, Christian, secular labels. Sony, one day he was like, John, is it ever hard for you to have an idea and not share it immediately? And I was like, yeah, it's like, which platform? And he was like, well, right now you've got a keg party lifestyle with your ideas. People are just coming in and getting content. He said, you need some wine ideas. You need some ideas you take and put on a shelf behind you for a year, for 2 years that you only talk about with friends so that they can actually turn into something that's magical and meaningful. And so that idea of wine ideas of knowing, yes, some ideas I get them right out. But some ideas I go, okay, I can put that on a shelf. I'm going to add a bunch of ideas. I'm going to let it grow. I'm going to let it age in a way. And then when I do it, it's going to be awesome. But I'm going to give it time to kind of turn into the idea it needs to be.
How do you collect and keep those ideas? Just real practical question.
Yeah. So right now, what I'm doing is I'm doing 90 days of bullet journal. So I've never really done bullet journaling. When people hear that, if they know what that is, they think of like the most complicated, ornate version you see on Pinterest or Instagram where like you're using felt tip pens from Japan and like you're doing rainbow, like forget it, dude. Mine is I use a blue pen and I write stuff down. So right now I have a couple pages that I write ideas on because the problem is I have probably 20,000 ideas right back there in notebooks that are gone forever. They might as well be gone forever because
you're not going to go back. It's like, oh yeah, August 2014. Yeah.
So now I collect them and now I'm figuring out a process to actually touch them again to say, where does this go? And then the other thing I have I have pages right now that I'm like, okay, these are my pages of ideas. One of the ideas that actually kind of summarizes the way I'm thinking about ideas says this: how many acorns become full-blown trees? That's what happens to most ideas. Figure out the math. So one day I'm walking down the street, I'm seeing thousands and thousands and thousands of acorns. They're not all going to become 40-foot oak trees, and that's not failure. So what if I was able to say, yeah, I'm going to collect more than I use? That's not like, it's not a 1-to-1. Like, can you imagine like if I had to produce every idea, like, man, the pressure. So I'm going to do an idea, probably an article, maybe a podcast where I'm like, no, like 1% become trees. So what if, let's double it. Let's get you to 2% ideas shipped, as Seth Godin would say, 2% produced, because they're not all supposed to be produced. And that's not failure. And so sometimes when people say, I've got to come up with an idea system, they think the system is going to produce every idea they do. It's not supposed to. You're supposed to have a couple ideas that you add some other cool ideas to. And I do a book every 2 years. I do a couple speeches a year. I do some Instagram. I do some YouTube, but I have way more ideas than I'll ever publish. And what I've learned is like, same with my to-do list. Whenever I feel failure about my to-do list, I tell myself, that's not failure. That just means my imagination is bigger than my calendar. And that's dope. That is dope statement. Yeah. And so my imagination will always crush space and time. My imagination is always bigger than 24 hours. That's a joke. Like my imagination and what I can create in 24 hours, way bigger than what I can execute in 24 hours. That's not failure. That's a gift. And I accept that gift and I'm going to make the most of it.
It almost feels to me, and tell me if I got this wrong, because I'm working on some new content that I want to release later this year about the new content creation cycle. Because I was in that mode for a long time. You go do your homework, you study, maybe you bounce it off a team, and then you go and deliver the talk. All right, that's what you do. But it almost feels like you got multiple canvases to paint on. You've got Twitter, you've got Instagram, you got YouTube, you got your podcast now. And then also like, I'm going to go experiment over there and let's see what happens. Oh, nothing. Okay. All right. Well, let's try it over on Instagram. It's like, nothing. Put it on Twitter, 2,000 likes. It's like, whoa, what did I change? What did I do? Is that like, it's almost like a canvas you can paint on? Like you plant a whole lot of oaks and see which ones grow up?
100%. And for me, like, I know, okay, so like I asked yesterday, essentially, is it ever hard for you to not just be hot or cold with ideas or hot or cold with goals? Like you're all in or you're all out. And so like 250 people respond, 92% say they're all in. And some of them share gifts, some of them share ideas. Cool. So now when I go and write about that, I can say, I asked people and 300 people said this. So now like I've got a community example. Same with like the way I write books is now, I'll do a big challenge in September that's free, and I'll have 5,000 people try it, and I'll share the ideas, and they'll tell me which ones work and which ones don't. And I'll get real examples so that when I write a book, I have those examples, and I can say, here's how somebody did it. I mean, you read Soundtracks; it's full of real people. Going,
it's so well done,
and that's where it's from. And so, yeah, I kind of look at it that way. And then the other thing is, I go, you can experiment on Instagram and Twitter because it goes away. Like you could do an Instagram live and like it goes away. YouTube's a different thing. So I kind of understand. I'm not going to do a ton of experimenting on YouTube because it's going to be a video that's there. I'm going to do some that might turn into something bigger. Like it might turn into a book. It might turn into a speech. But I know that like on Twitter, on Instagram live, like I can figure it out. And then I'm an audio processor. So it's easy for me to go, oh, hey, here's an idea that shows up. Like I like talking my way into a situation. It's fun, which is why I don't want my podcast to be super scripted because I'll miss the fun examples that my brain goes, what about this? What about this? And so, yeah, but I see it as it's not super linear. It's definitely more, let me try this idea here. Let me tweak it. Let me try this idea over here. Let me tweak it. Wow. A bunch of people posted that. That's the problem. We're the worst judges of our own ideas. Like you're so close to the idea, you can't tell what it is. And so I need other people to say that like, my most successful as far as like viral idea was Jesus Juke, which I wrote for Stuff Christians Like. That was a throwaway post in a week with 10 other posts. I didn't think twice about that idea. It's like somebody sent me that phrase yesterday. So like 9 years later or whatever it is, people are still using that in vernacular. I didn't, same with like John Bon Jovi didn't want Living on a Prayer on his album because he's like, it's a cheesy song. You can go through everybody who's had a big hit, rarely do they go, I knew the second we did it, it was going to be massive. And then the public responded the exact, like there's a reason 60 publishers rejected The Help. They weren't 60 idiots. It's just hard to see what's going to be good sometimes.
Or The Queen's Gambit, another great example.
Exactly. So you just have to kind of know that and be able to kind of roll with it.
So I got to say, we're going to morph to soundtracks because I think there's some great stuff there. But this sort of is a bridging question between creativity, content, the writing process, and your new book. As a writer myself, this simple phrase made me just drop the book. And in a good way, kind of like, oh crap, he's such a good writer. And it's so simple. I could have pulled many of them, but this one is so simple. I wasn't a tech pioneer because I didn't own enough hoodies, but I was way ahead of the curve. I just thought that was so clever. And because there was so much in there, right? Like obviously if you've been to Silicon Valley, you see all the guys wandering around in hoodies. It's like, okay. So you've got like a cultural idiom and a couple of people are going to get that joke. And it was kind of funny. And yet it wasn't your main point, but it came in there. How do you end up with sentences like that? Because your books are full of them. I asked Seth Godin this question when he was on, because you guys, when you're done, like when we're riffing like this, you're kind of all over the place, like just having a great convo. But like when you're delivering in a talk, when you're writing in a book, there's really no throwaway sentences. There's a lot of calories and a lot of puns per minute. And I wonder how you do that. How are you honing that?
I write a lot of bad sentences first. Like I write a lot of, I kind of write in layers where I just try to get the idea. The words are wrong. First layer, idea. I just want to communicate the idea. Nobody's seeing that. Second layer, I'm like, okay, how do I make it more positive? My voice tends to, like, my first draft is often melancholy. Like I have like Counting Crows syndrome where it's first draft, little melancholy. I had some positivity in the second draft or second layer. Third layer, I'm like, okay, where does this help somebody? Like, cause my stuff is designed to help people. Like want, like, I'm not writing a diary. I want people to go, that helped me. I'd use that on a Tuesday. And then the fourth layer is I go, okay, where's some humor? Like, where can I put some amplifying humor, not distracting humor? Distracting humor takes you away from the main point and it's not worth the cost. Amplifying humor takes the main point and adds a little bit of seasoning, adds a little bit of flavor to what you're doing. And so that's kind of the layers I use. And then like, I try to make sure, like you said, that it's super concentrated, that like every line earns its keep. If I take a sidetrack, it's worth the sidetrack. If that it's like, I kind of think about it in a speech, like I do this joke about Dr. Dre. So I tell this story about Bose. You've heard me do it before where like we had a head start in headphones. We didn't listen to customers who wanted colors and designs, and Dr. Dre and Beats did, and they ate our lunch. And so then I tell a story and then I say kind of, almost under my breath, we broke the first rule of electronics. We forgot about Dre. And that's funny to 40% of the audience. The 60% of the rest of the audience, it didn't cost them anything. It was 2 seconds. So it didn't distract them so much that they're like, I didn't get it. And it's the juxtaposition of the two things. We broke the first rule of electronics. Oh, he's about to say something really serious. The first rule of electronics. We forgot about Dre. Forgot about Dre as a rap lyric from Dr. Dre and Eminem. So the people that get it feel validated because like, and then they're often in a corporate structure. They're not expecting a Dr. Dre Eminem reference. So they're like, what? And so like stuff like that. I love that back and forth. And I love to serve the audience that way because again, it's not like that's a super obscure reference, but it's obscure enough that the people that get it love it. And the people that miss it aren't hurt. They don't feel like you've talked down to them. You haven't left them out of something. And so like, that's kind of one of the tensions I'm always going back and forth on when it comes to how I structure a sentence, how I have a line, the tension I'm pulling. Like, that's what I'm thinking about.
It's uniquely your voice as your books tend to be, but you listen to editors. I seem to remember, tell me if I got the facts wrong, but with Finish, didn't it go from 80,000 words down to 38,000 words or something?
Very little explanation with very little hand holding. And the same with soundtracks. Like I changed to a new publisher. I went from Penguin to Baker, and you're always nervous when you change publishers because editor relationships. And Brian Voss, who edited the book, was fantastic and challenged me and pushed me. And so, I think you always listen to editors. You always see what they're like. And a lot of the time they're taking out stuff that you're like, I knew, like I tried to slide it by them because I wanted to do it because it was fun to write, like, but it's not the right thing and it doesn't. And so I feel like the editors always make what I'm doing so much better. Okay.
How do you not let your ego get in the way? How do you not be like, I'm Jon Acuff. I've got multiple New York Times bestsellers. You're telling me I need to cut this stuff? Like there are a lot of people who have not accomplished what you've accomplished, who would definitely pull that card and go, listen, I've been doing this for 15 years. Like, leave me alone.
Yeah, but I did that with the podcast. So like I said, my first podcast, I pulled the ego card. It went very poorly. Like the times I play the ego card, it sucks. And I try to remember that. And then also like, Brian Koppelman said it, Jerry Seinfeld said it, like, give it 24 hours, like, especially something new you've created. Don't get feedback on it for the first 24 hours. Yeah. Like, I can't let my wife read something new that I've written in the first 24 hours. So a lot of times I'll have to sit on the edits. I'll have to decide, is it something worth fighting for? Like, are they not seeing something that I really believe in? And I'm going to show them how much I care. Like a lot of times an editor will go along with you if they know that you go, no. Here are the 5 reasons I did that. I know this about my audience. And like, if you're putting in the work, an editor goes, yeah, that's great. Like, I want you to put in the work. If you're being lazy on it and like, I just like it because I'm Jon Acuff, then like, it's not going to go well. But yeah, I'll often have to sit on it. And then, I mean, if I'm being honest, there's definitely moments where depending on the person, I'm like, I can't believe that. I'm so frustrated. I'm so mad. Like I'll go jog. Like, yeah, there's moments when I get really, really mad over stuff I really, really care about. And the hope is that like the day later, I'll go, you know what? They want the same thing I want. Like they didn't send that to me as a personal attack. They didn't send that to me to say, remember, you're dumb. Like, remember, like nobody likes your ideas. Your face is stupid. Like they sent it because they want to sell the most books possible and help the most amount of people possible. And so like in soundtracks, I said that, like I said, how often we don't choose the thoughts we want to have. And so like, there's somebody, every listener right now has somebody that the second they text message them, they get furious. They don't even have to read the message. It's just
truth.
Something up.
Yeah.
The meeting they have. And so I will physically write down, they're on your side. They want to make money too. They have it. Like I'll write those down so that those thoughts, not my negative ones, like you never have to go look for negative thoughts. They find you. You have to look for hope thoughts. You have to look for true thoughts. And so I'll do that. I've had multiple meetings with a handful of people that are frustrating to me just because of our personalities or tension, whatever. And before the meeting, I'll write down on a Post-it note, because a lot of them are Zoom meetings. I can see it while we're talking. They want the same thing you want. This isn't an attack. They want to give you money. Like I'll write these things down. You go, well, that's silly. Like, yeah, I agree. I wish I didn't have to do that, but I do. Cause my brain is like, let's see this personally. Let's get furious about this. And like, let's bite our nose off to spite our face or whatever it is. Like, let's do that right here and blow this whole thing up. And I'm like, no, that sounds terrible. Why would we do that? And they're like, my brain's like, cause something bad happened 10 years ago that reminds you of this. And it's a completely different person, but let's do it again. I'm like, no. So like, there's all these little tricks I use.
So what's a soundtrack? It's Overthinking. It's a book all about what's a soundtrack. The subtitle, Surprising Solution to Overthinking. And again, brilliant cover. Love it.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I was so happy with that. A soundtrack is a repetitive thought, a thought you get stuck on a loop. I define overthinking as when what you think gets in the way of what you want. And it always leads to inaction. And I say, overthinking is not a personality trait. It's the most expensive fear in the world because it steals time, creativity, and productivity. And it's what companies invest in this more than any other thing without even knowing they're doing it. So that's what overthinking is when you get on a loop. And a soundtrack is one of your kind of repetitive overthinking thoughts where you have a personal soundtrack you hear in certain situations. So
what would a soundtrack for you be? Give us a couple of soundtracks that play in your head unless you check them.
Yeah, they're trying to take advantage of you. So there's, if I've been hurt in business relationships where somebody did take advantage of me, that's fine to admit, to process, to deal with, but it's not helpful if I then go, everyone is trying to take advantage of me. I have to protect what I'm doing. And then I bring that into a new negotiation where the person, like, I don't even have any information yet. And I'm already from a place of they're trying to attack. Remember, they're out to get you. So that would be a negative soundtrack. And so the book talks about you have to retire your broken soundtracks, replace them with new ones, and then repeat them so often they become as automatic as the old ones. So that was where, again, I'd write down, they're trying to give you money. Like, it's kind of like whenever I go to a restaurant and they seem mad that I'm there, like whenever I have really bad service from a waiter, I just want to say, I just want to tip you. Like, I'm not like, the only reason I'm here is to like buy your food and hopefully give you like a great tip. Like, this isn't a fight. Like, you put these things on the menu. I just want to choose them and then pay you money. Like, but they're bringing some negative soundtrack into the situation. And so that would be one for me. They're trying to take advantage of you. You're all out of ideas. Every time I sit down to write a book, you're all out of ideas. All, like, my walls are covered with them. I have notebooks full of them, but this is the moment, or everyone already knows that thing you're interested in. Everyone, like, they already, like, I mean, you and I have talked about that. You had a conversation with a huge publisher that said, Carey, this idea is, I've never heard of this. And you had the same reaction.
I'm like,
really? Like, I thought.
I know. I'm like, how could you never have heard of that? And you think you're late to the party, right?
Yeah. So like those would be, but again, another soundtrack we already talked about would be, it's too late to have a podcast. It's too late to learn YouTube. It's too late to write a book. You're not qualified for that. Another one would be, I don't get to be an entrepreneur because my dad wasn't an entrepreneur.
Right.
So like, that's a common one. People, like, especially men, they're like, my dad never taught me how to change the oil, or like, I didn't have you see these entrepreneurs that are like, when I was a fetus, I had a like side hustle, and I've sold 52 businesses. And you're like, well, I can't do that. So I must not be able to be an entrepreneur. And that's a broken soundtrack. So when you start to kind of go through the book, you'll start to go, oh, I have those. Like, I do that. What do I want to do instead? Because your thoughts, impact your actions, which impacts your results.
Yeah, it's interesting because you hit what you self-describe as a career block in 2017 when Finish came out. And you spend a chapter talking about that moment. I'd love to do that because I think a lot of people feel like, listen, Jon, I had a good thing going, okay? And then 2020 hit and it kind of blew up my business. I don't know if church will ever be the same. I'm not great at this whole online thing. I don't know. I'm not 17. I didn't go to Stanford. Help me out here. So you ran into that just 4 years ago when Finish came out. What happened? How'd you talk yourself out of it?
Well, I mean, I just got into, there's certain things that the longer I spend time away from them, the scarier they become. And writing is one of them. I'd love to say that I'm one of these writers that's like, I run through a field with a ribbon and it comes naturally. Like, it doesn't. When I add a couple of fear days on top of each other, it gets easier and easier and easier to avoid it. And people feel that way about a lot of things. The gym, like, it's intimidating to go back to the gym, or it's intimidating to, try technology. Like, maybe you've spent a year away from the current technology and every day you spend away feels more intimidating. And so like, I just felt like I got to a place where I wasn't actively writing. I didn't know what I wanted to write next. I was afraid to do the early stages of a book, which are always kind of awkward, which are always kind of figuring out what you want to do, which are always moving, shapes about and outlines about. And so, and that just kind of built on itself. And that's my job. It's not like I'm not a pastor where I write a book on the side. Like, this is the thing. I do two things.
You're an author. This is what you do.
And so like, I had to jump back into it. So I did a couple of things. One thing I did was I did a comedy show. So I did a 2-night comedy gig where I wrote a 60-minute set, and that kind of creatively helped kick my butt a little bit. And then I wrote a whole book about these funny ideas I had just to get back into the muscle of writing. And so sometimes if you're stuck in an area, doing something on the side of that area can reintroduce you to the area. So I don't think anybody will ever read this 50,000 word.
Yeah, you never published that. I think I read a chapter or two. It was actually good. It was fun. But why did you write it?
I wrote it because I need to get back into the habit of writing. Like, it's the same way that, like, say you are a really consistent runner and then you took a year off. You shouldn't start with a marathon. You should give yourself the gift of walking around the neighborhood briskly. And so like that, I think self-kindness is a superpower. And so for me, the ridiculousness of sitting down to write, like, I wrote a whole essay about the optimism of subscribing to the New Yorker. Like, I subscribed to the New Yorker and it was overwhelming. Like, they send you like 100,000 words every week. Like, you can't, like, you would have to take a day off of work every week to catch up on the New Yorker. I had never purchased a single issue. And I was like, I need 52 of those delivered to my house and like a wave of content. So I wrote a silly essay about that. But again, it was easing back into it. And I'm doing all my other jobs at the time. Like, I don't have a life where I can go, like, I'm just going to find myself. Like, I was still speaking. I was still doing consulting. I was still doing all these things, but I would sneak away to the coffee house and try to write to get back into the rhythm of it so I could ease back into it versus like, I've got to start everything tomorrow. That's just not how my life works.
Mm. You and Seth Godin both give a lot of credit to Zig Ziglar. You got a chapter on him. Talk about Zig. And he just died like a few years ago, didn't he? He was around until recently.
He and his wife and his son Tom before he passed away, and he was just a fountain of information. Like he was, giving me tips at lunch about travel and communication. And so for me, and that was what was interesting. I kept bumping into people I really liked and I really respected who used Zig's affirmations, like the idea of reprogramming the way you think, like, cause it's a muscle, like thinking's a muscle. And so hearing Seth talk about that, another friend of mine named Tim Grahl talked about that. And so I really was like, okay, I want to explore what Zig does. And then I got to interview his son, Tom. That's probably one of my favorite parts of the book because I kept trying to kind of break down Tom from the positivity standpoint. Like Tom is a big believer in like intentional positivity. Like Seth is a big believer in that. Zig was a big believer in that. So I kept looking for kind of loopholes, like, cause I tend to be kind of sarcastic and negative. And I was like, but what about? And Tom was like, yeah, no, here's what you think about. Here's what you like, for instance, Tom Ziglar said like that his dad wasn't like, against admitting there's a problem. He wasn't like a Pollyanna. He was like, no, admit there's a problem so you can fix it. If you pretend there's not, you don't get to fix it. Like, but focus on the solution, not the problem. And so like a lot of people, when they admit there's a problem, they stay on the problem. They don't work on the solution. So he was like, so I was like, okay, well, give me another example. And one of his examples was when my dad would get delayed at an airport. Like if you fly more than twice a year, you're getting delayed. Like that's happening. That's just math. It never hurt him because he always carried his most important work with him. So a delayed flight was an invitation to do the thing that mattered most to him. And like, that's a subtle shift, but that's him going, I'm not going to let a delayed flight ruin my day. We have this culture where we're like, I woke up on the wrong side of the bed. Like our traffic was terrible. My whole day is ruined. Or I saw a tweet I disagreed with. My whole day is ruined. Forget that. Like stop giving all those negative thoughts the power to control your day. Zig would say, no, I'm like, I know I'm going to have a delayed flight because that's what happens. Sometimes it happens so that I'm safe and they want to de-ice the plane, whatever. But I'm going to have my most important work with me. And when it gets delayed, boom, I'm going to go work on that and I'm going to knock that out. I'm going to feel great about it. So I just really appreciated Zig's deliberate approach. It wasn't fake. It wasn't syrupy. It was action-based. I am lumped into the kind of motivational space. And I really get frustrated by motivational people that don't give you real advice with real steps and real actions. Like it's one of my pet peeves. And so I love to simplify things. I love it to be actionable. That's why I like soundtracks is I felt like I got to take this complicated topic of thinking and really boil it down and test it and try it and then give practical actions.
One of the things for those of us who travel a lot or used to travel a lot, it is easy to I used to
remember travel. Yeah. Suitcases and stuff. It's crazy.
Oh, dude, I'll tell you. And I was flying about 150,000 miles the last couple of years before COVID. And one of the things, because we have spent a lot of time together on the road, is we'd be at an event and I'd be like, oh, my flight's delayed or whatever. And you like, was it intentional that you don't complain about travel? It's like, dude, no, we get to do this. And I'm sure you've cracked once in a while and complained about it, but like, you've had a very positive attitude in my experience to travel to like, no, I get to do this. Was that a soundtrack thing that you developed early on?
For those, one of mine was I deliberately, like if I make my flight, I got to go home and that's a huge win. And I'm deliberate about that. Like if I jumped on an early flight, that's a huge win and I got to go home. So I try to look at it that way and go, okay, like I got to do this. And then a lot of it, and I put this in the book, a lot of it was perceived anger or shame or frustration from my family that they weren't giving me. I was adding that. Like we as people with our soundtracks will add things to situations that aren't really there. So I was adding the soundtrack. My wife is furious that I travel. She's so mad. And eventually one day she said, I'm not. Like, go do your job. Like, I love that you're good at that. I love that you're great at that. Like, go do your job. And then the second part with the kids was she was like, with mirror neurons, your kids will reflect back what you put out. So I was making a huge deal about travel. Like one of the biggest things I do is like, I'm so sorry. I have to go travel. I'll be home in 2 sleeps. Like I'll call you every minute. And your kids don't even know to be sad. Like they don't know like, oh, this is a terrible thing. Like they just go like, oh, you're going to work. But like Jenny said, you're giving them your shame and your guilt and your sadness, and they'll reflect that. Don't do that. Just go do your job and let's see it as a positive thing. And what's interesting, we spent 18 years telling our kids that work sucks. And then we're surprised that in their 20s, they don't want to do a job. And we're like, of course they don't. Like, so I had to deliberately change travel into, I can't believe I get to do this because it's awesome. And I found a job I love so much that every delayed flight doesn't even hit me because I'm getting it like the hour on stage worth every delayed flight. Like it's amazing. And so now it becomes a filter for, am I doing the right thing? Like if I'm willing to put up with like 10 things that a lot of people feel frustrated about, and I'm still excited, I bumped into something that's soul connected. Like okay, cool. Like I'm dragging, if I'm willing to stay at like the La Quinta in the Baltimore airport because the flight got canceled and I'm still like, you know what, pretty good day, then all right, I'm on to something.
How do you write a new anthem? I think you call it a new anthem in the book. So you got this bad soundtrack. It's this stuck record, this broken record playing in your head. How do you create a new anthem? What do you do?
The easiest way, the simplest way to do it is to flip the old one. So if you say, people are trying to take advantage of me, people are trying to help me. Like people are trying to help me and I'm going to find ways to see that. I'm going to look for that. So don't go to a blank piece of paper and go, okay, I have to come up with like some amazing thoughts that I think that like, oh, that's super intimidating. I think you can get there, but entry level is you take something that's broken and you flip it and you go, what's the opposite of this? Okay. If travel is negative, travel is positive, and I'm going to find proof of that. I'm going to look for proof of that. I'm going to look for good things. Again, like you have to actively collect those things. And you have to be deliberate about that. Because we're so like, that was one of the things in the book. In the English language, we don't have a word for the opposite of trauma. Like that's how powerful trauma is. We physically don't have a word.
Oh, wow.
For the opposite.
Yeah, that's
what
true.
I mean by that, and scientists have studied it, there's not a word to describe, like when you're in a grocery store and trauma comes up from 4 years ago, there's not a positive version of that happens. Your brain just doesn't work that way. Where you're in the grocery store and you get this overwhelming, like, oh man, 4 years ago, this thing happened and it carries your day. Trauma, on the other hand, does that all the time. And so you have to go, okay, knowing that I'm going to actively find that. So the easiest way is I think about it like a coin, like you flip a coin. One side says people are trying to take advantage of me. I'm too old to do this. It's too late. Like, and I'd write down, there's still time. There's still time because, and you might not believe it at first, but you're going to repeat it enough until you do. I mean, like right now I've got on this one note that says light and easy because I wanted this new book to be light and easy. The writing process, like I just wrote it again because the note fell down. I want the marketing to be light and easy. Like it's going to be light and easy. So I'm working on that and I'm working to be deliberate about that. And I'm going to hustle really hard, but like, I'm like, here's another one. Like it says, the note says specific is sexy because I know that if I'm specific in my writing, it's so much better writing. When I say something, it's not good. When I say, in Albuquerque at 2 a.m, this happened. Or when I say, I don't wear enough hoodies. Like I didn't say, cause I'm not cool enough. I didn't say I wasn't a tech pioneer because I'm not cool enough. That's not sexy. That's not specific. Specific is hoodie because it triggers. Oh yeah, Mark Zuckerberg is always wearing hoodies. Like that's a specific.
Yeah, I was back at Stanford, like literally driving down the road at Stanford, watching all these engineering students in hoodies going, you took me there with that image. That's why I dropped the book. I'm like, that's genius.
That for me is how you do it. So you write it, like you flip them, you collect them, you write it down, you borrow them. You're going to hear great ones from other people that say, like Colleen Berry, the woman I interviewed for my podcast, she was like, everybody has a different alignment in their car. And sometimes you have to steer harder to the right for your car. So she, and I was like, oh, you're right. Like there's days where like, this day just sucks and I got to steer harder to the right. Like some days I only have to do 2 of the stress relief things. Some days I got to do the whole 10 because it's been a garbage day. That's okay. I'm going to steer right. So I might put steer right on a Post-it note because I want to see it again. I want to be reminded of it again when everything kind of gets lost. I want to be very deliberate about that and go, okay, that's right. That's right. I remember that. That calls back to this. Like, all right, we're cool.
The reframing is really powerful. It's funny because I've heard you say that like people want to give me money, which sounds on the one hand, you kind of look at that and go, what? What are you talking about? But I actually use that today in a staff meeting. We're getting ready to launch a course to thousands of leaders. And my staff is like, okay, we want to make sure we over deliver. We want to make sure. And everybody has this like silent guilt about that. And I actually, you say that, Brad Lomenick says that. And I'm like, no. And not everybody's going to buy the course. That's fine. But there are some people going, I need some help and I'm willing to invest in it. And
totally, dude. Here's another one you can use with your team.
Yeah.
So don't say the number, obviously. Take the number of how many people bought your last course.
Right.
That's the number of people you're creating for. The problem is when teams start stuff, they go, we got to do something that reaches 1 million people. They never say that out loud, but that's the expectation. Screw that. You got to find 10,000 people of all the humans. Like, dude, like that's fantastic. Like of 7 billion, you only have to find 10,000 of them and you have to create and serve them. Awesome. That takes the pressure in a completely different way. Same with writing a book. If you sit down to write a book and you go, okay, I gotta sell 2 million copies of this, forget it, dude. If you sit down and go, I gotta find 10,000 people that are going to be engaged, it changes it. Like, and those 10,000 people are going to be really excited. Like, and so that's the, like, it's little things like that, that again, like, I don't mean, people are trying to give me money. I know can sound like some sort of like weird message, but for me, it reframes my thinking that the reason we're in this conversation is that they're interested.
Listen, I tried to raise money for 20 years in the church, right? For a cause I believed in. And I just assumed nobody wanted to give. And then that reframing makes it, there's going to be people who don't give, but there are people who want to live a generous lifestyle, who believe in the mission, who actually want to make a contribution. So please invite me to give. And don't coerce the people who don't. As Seth Godin says, we quoted him a lot. They don't get the joke. This isn't for them. But there are people for whom this is.
But think about this. Like, do you understand how different your actions would be if you approach it from people are trying to give me money versus I have to go take people's money? Like, do you know the shame and the guilt and like, I got to go get their money for like, man, you do different things. Where if you say people are trying to give me money, you go, I got to make it as easy as possible for them. I got to make it as clear as possible for them. I got to make sure that I super serve their real needs, not mine. Like I'm Carey Nieuwhof in a basement with a successful podcast. I got to be in the trenches so that I know, oh, we were going to do this module on this, but man, we really heard this need for this. We need to make sure we serve that need because it's been 10 years since I've had that need personally, but that person's still in that space. I really need to help them with that. What do I do to do that? It changes how you approach what you're creating versus I got to go take it.
And then the people who don't buy in, that's great. We got lots of other stuff for you. You don't ever have to give me $1. That's fine. Like it's 100%. I don't have to be mad at you. You don't have to be mad at me. That's okay.
That's not a hater. That's not a, like, that's not a hater. That's somebody that chose something different. And that's great. That's not, that's where you have to, it has to be a product, not your personality. Like,
and dude, this conversation was free.
Yeah, exactly.
So we got lots there. Oh, this is good. What's one thing about overthinking that many people miss? Other than the government does not make you eat your steak well done in Canada. That's the only inaccuracy in the book, John.
I was told in Canada by the waitress that we couldn't eat our steak. We had to order it well done. So you need to take it up with whoever's in Whistler.
You were in Vancouver, right? Were you at Whistler?
We're at Whistler. Yeah.
Well, listen, you come to my backyard. I'll cook it medium rare, however you want.
I would love that.
I've never heard that, but that's okay. We're still friends.
People got from Canada were really mad and we're like, well, that's just because we have better food standards than your terrible country. And
I've lived here my whole life. I've never heard that.
Isn't that weird? Yeah. So what do people overlook about overthinking? That they can do something about it. Like it's not something that it's not set in stone. And you can actually use it for you. Like you can turn, I can't write a book into, I should write a book. I should definitely write a book. I'm the best person to write this book. And that feels impossible maybe at first, but it's 100% doable. So like the story I tell of my own life in there is 2008. I get an email from a conference planner that's like, will you come speak at our conference? And I was like, yeah, I think I could do that. I had no proof of that. I'd never been paid to speak. I'd never done a speech before. Like I had no tangible evidence. All I had was a single thought that was like, I think I can do this. And that I kept building on, I kept repeating, I kept growing. And so, that's the biggest thing. That's what gets me excited is like, when you change the way you think about yourself, about your relationships, about your world, you do get to change your actions, and it does get to change your results. And that's what I would say. I think most people think a thought is something they have, not something they hone. They wait for a thought to show up versus going, no, these are the thoughts I'm going to have. Here's how I'm going to hone them and change them and be excited about them. And I'm going to pull this slingshot back and kind of launch with this versus, well, I woke up on the wrong side of the bed, or, whoa, I had these 5 thoughts and I'm a prisoner to the 5 thoughts, versus going like, nah, these are the 10 that are going to, this is my soundtrack. This is my playlist. And it's a playlist I want to hear. And when I hear a song that I don't want to hear, I'm going to recognize it. I'm going to retire it. I'm going to replace it with something new.
Well, and I think this is a really good thing to be focusing on this year. It has been a whole heap of negative. We were already heading there before the disruption, the crisis, and I think a lot of us are stuck on our heads. And what's interesting, Groeschel, speaking of him, and we're all working out now, he was on this show at the beginning of the year, or in February, I think, talking about what he would call overthinking, winning the war in your mind. Read his book. Completely different take than your book. Both really helpful, both extremely good. So Soundtracks is available anywhere books are sold. You read the audiobook as well, which is always my favorite.
Yeah,
Truth.
they added a bunch of bonus stories. So
awesome.
there's a bonus chapter. There's 6 different bonus stories that I went through and actually wrote out versus just riffs, like really fun bonus content. I love reading the audiobooks. I think it's, for the books I write, it'd be weird if I got some British dude that was like reading the books, because I'm talking about like a lot of them are in the trench, like mistakes I'm making. It'd be weird.
My favorite is authors who read their own books by far. And your stuff, I mean, laugh out loud, like it's a lot of fun. Tell us about where people can find you these days. All the channels, but
there's a lot of them. I mean, my podcast is the name of it is All It Takes Is a Goal. If you look up Jon Acuff or All It Takes Is a Goal, it's everywhere podcasts are available. The Instagram is just Jon Acuff, JONACUFF. Same with Twitter. YouTube, I'm author Jon Acuff, and Facebook, author Jon Acuff. And then my website's acuff.me. So a lot of different places. And Soundtracks, super excited about. It's going to be super fun. So would love people to, if you thought to yourself, I overthink, or the thing that I keep bumping into is people that'll go, oh, my husband needs this book, or my friend needs this book, or my team needs this book. We're going to lead our company through it. I've never had a topic that so many people have said, oh yeah, identify with the idea of overthinking. So I'm excited about it.
I can't wait to see this get into people's hands. And for those of you who do what Jon and I do, one of the reasons, and I'm going to embarrass you for a second, one of the reasons I love our friendship, but one of the reasons I love reading what you write and watching your videos and following your craft is you work so hard at it. And I have so much respect for that. And if you just want to become a better communicator, if you want to become a better author, honestly, just buy the book. It's so well done. So well done. Jon,
I really appreciate that.
Thanks for gifting the world. Thanks for gifting us. It's been a lot of fun. It always is.
Great. And I'll have you on mine at some point when I'm ready.
Oh, that'd be a lot of fun. I wasn't going to ask because, when people do that, it gets
no, but I definitely
gets awkward, right?
It'd be fun to be on the other side of it. And it was fun to be on the other side with you and Tony. I was honored that we got to do that conversation. So,
wow. We really wanted you to lead us in that. And we're so grateful for you. Thanks, Jon.
Thanks, Carey.
Well, I hope today's episode was helpful to you. You can always get more by subscribing to my channel. I also have a lot more content over at CareyNieuwhof.com for leaders in business and leaders in churches. And you can get transcripts of this episode there and so much more, plus some other stuff I do for leaders. So head on over there to discover more at CareyNieuwhof.com. And in the meantime, I really hope our time together today has helped you lead like never before.